think most people who are trying to join, it looks like are enjoying. So I think whenever you're ready, Sasha, we can call to order.
Awesome. All right, good evening, everyone. Calling to order the board work session for January 27th. It is currently 5:04 p.m. And we will start with our budget discussion. So take it away, Dr. Duty.
All right, so we have expanded on the budget a little bit from each time, we get a little further along the process. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lenita to walk you through what we have, and then we can answer any questions. And then we've also got some topics just to get your feedback on, so when we come back to you in February, we can go another step further and be further down the path. So.
Oh, and one second,
Yeah,
I forgot.
sure.
And in attendance today, in person, is myself, Heather Tell, Lewis Jones, and James Herndon. And by Zoom is Jana Johnson Davis. All right.
Awesome, thank you. And we have about, I think, 7 people beyond school staff who are joining us, so.
Awesome.
All right, so, Lenita there, I can't see on my screen if she's there.
I'm here.
Okay, Lenita, oh yeah, there it is, it's up there. Okay, go ahead and take it away, Lenita.
Okay. This is the agenda of topics that I will review with you today, starting with the budget calendar.
Hey,
Today
Lenita,
is,
can you zoom in on that at all so that we maximize the,
I think
Five,
Shayna is doing it.
oh, Shayna, can you zoom in on that at all? Yeah, that's good. Thank you. That'll be better. Thank you.
Okay.
These documents are in the agenda on eBoard as well, or on Assembly. So, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Okay, if we could go back to the calendar. Today is the 3rd public budget meeting we have had to discuss the fiscal year 22 budget. We will also discuss the budget again at February's board meeting on the 9th. Next slide is your fiscal year 21 budget and review. The last column includes a reduction in supplies and equipment of $1.1 million. This is the amount of the 2 grants from CARES that were referenced at January's board meeting. You do not see this amount listed in revenue because the CARES funds are federal, and you cannot mix federal funds with general funds. Therefore, we are reallocating expenses from general fund to the federal grant. As a result of the reallocation, $1.1 million in expenses, you will see that the projected ending fund balance for fiscal year 21 increased from 6.7% to 7.9%. Okay. CARES grant. The district has received 3 CARES grants. The first grant was allocated to the department to purchase district-related expenses for COVID-19, and that's the $321,000. The second and third grants are the grants that I discussed on the previous slides. They were used to reallocate COVID-related expenses from general fund to the grant fund. The district has spent over $2.2 million on COVID-related expenditures. Next, we have legislative priorities.
Sorry,
So there
Sorry, Lenita, this is Heather. I'm just a little slow here. I'm still looking for the line you referenced on the first page.
Oh, okay.
The CARES money, the previous slide.
Okay. So.
But I was just like one step behind the entire time.
Okay, no problem. So if you look at the last column, it's titled CARES Amended 3 Fiscal Year 2021 Budget.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look at from fund balance, do you see at the top where the revenue sources are listed, the last line says from fund balance?
Yeah.
And you see it was 11.1 that we was taking from fund balance. And now it's 10.0. So we're taking less from fund balance because of the grant funds.
Got it.
And
I
so-
see how this is working now. Thank you.
And if you go all the way to the bottom of the last column, you see the 7.9%.
Yeah.
So it increased from 6.4 to 7.9 because of that 1.1 million.
Great. Okay,
And that
thank you
one-
very much.
No, it's a great question. I had the same question the first time I saw it too. The
Yeah.
1.1 million also is reflected in the supplies and equipment line in that expenditure section. You'll see the supplies and equipment went from 6.2
Oh, okay.
million to 5.0 million.
Okay,
And that's what she was talking about when she said the reason that number goes down is because this is a general fund budget and the CARES fund is a federal fund. And so that money just gets put onto that other, basically that other funding source. So that all combines together.
okay.
The supplies money goes down, so you need less money from fund balance, so you end up with a greater fund balance.
Okay, thank
Does that
you.
help?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for stopping us. It can be
Thank you for
very
asking
confusing
that.
for sure.
That helps too.
Okay, Lenita.
Okay, did anyone
you
have
gonna-
any questions about the CARES grant?
Are we going to get an update I mean, we're talking about it, the austerity cuts right there?
Yeah, we'll have one coming
Okay.
up.
Yes,
Cool.
definitely. Okay, legislative priorities. So there are a few pending budget priorities that are being pursued by the legislative and state offices. The most profound one is restoring 60% of the 3.3 million in austerity cuts for both fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. This will equate to approximately 1.9 million. However, the district is responsible for the local 5 mil portion, which increases as state funding increase. So therefore, the district local 5 mil portion will increase to approximately 500,000. And of course, this amount is subject to change depending on the actual final amount of the austerity reduction. So this means if the full 60% is restored, that will equate to approximately 1.4 million in revenue for the district.
Can we pause right there, Lenita? I want to make sure you guys understand, for that part, we're talking about the current budget right now. Okay, and so that's unusual for it to change at this point.
Oh, so we're getting money back that we
Correct.
thought we had lost.
Oh,
Correct.
that's
I didn't-
So that is about the current budget, FY '21, this year right now. And then she's about to talk about the next budget, which is the proposed one we'll be talking about moving forward. Okay, so it can get confusing, because they're actually making changes to the revenue
To the
for this
current.
current year while we're in the year, and that's pretty unusual.
Oh, okay.
Correct.
Go ahead, Lenita.
Okay.
So,
Another
Sorry.
important
Hold on, Lenita.
sorry, when do we see that money? It
Well,
like,
we don't know yet. They're gonna vote in February, I think. Is that right, Lenita?
Well, they're gonna vote in February on the bonuses. Not sure when they're
Oh, that's
going to
right.
vote on the austerity reduction. But, they're saying 60%, but we know that that amount can be reduced. So 60% is the most that we will receive. But it's not a guarantee that we will receive that amount.
And I'm sorry, I jumped ahead to FY '22. Do you wanna go and talk about the bonus for FY '21 real quick?
Yes. Okay, so the $1,000 bonuses this fiscal year for school site personnel only. There has not been a concrete decision on who qualifies at the school site. However, there has been conversation that the CPI will be used to determine school site qualifications. So only individuals that are at the school site will receive the $1,000 bonus.
But it includes people like, I thought I read that it would include bus drivers and folks like that.
Right, bus
wrong.
drivers that drive for the different school sites. So they're still working out the particulars, but yes, they want to include bus drivers and school nutrition workers also.
They're mainly trying to cut out admin, I think.
Probably,
right?
yeah.
District, central office employees.
So this is, you probably recall at the start of last year, they announced the $2,000 raises and then ended up not coming through with it. So we are hopeful they will follow through with this and that it will actually happen. But again, that one is for this current fiscal year, so they would get that money this current year.
And they will
Okay.
vote on that on February the 18th.
Great.
so just to clarify, so the fiscal year is always called the year that it ends?
Exactly, yes. So when we say fiscal year '21, that means that it ends in June of '21.
Okay.
Yep.
And that money's from a federal grant, I think, so it's.
They are using their portion of CARES funds. So basically what they did, this is my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lenita, but they took the CARES allocation and they carved out these $1,000 bonuses, and then the remainder part they carved out, which is what that other amount is that we were talking about on the last slide.
But my point in asking that is it ought to be pretty certain that this is going to be
Hopefully,
done.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I feel like it's more certain than the previous one.
I
Than
feel
the
more
austerity.
comfortable with the bonus
Oh,
than the austerity 60%.
Right.
Correct.
Right, okay.
I'm more confident in this than in the austerity cut reduction, but also than I would when I was in that $2,000 announcement last year.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, next slide.
Do you, Lenita, do you want to just talk through the FY '22 part of that real quick, even though it's very similar?
The budget assumptions are, oh, okay,
No, right there
for
on
the
that.
legislative priorities.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked earlier about the 60% restoration of the austerity cuts. That would be for fiscal year 21, which is your 1.9, and also in fiscal year 22, which is your 1.9. And you see your local 5 mil share of approximately 500,000. Basically, the state is saying if we give you this money, then your part, which would come from property tax, is the 500,000.
So that's where I want to make sure you're clear, because it's the exact same thing happening, but in 2 different fiscal years.
Okay.
So we've got the first one we talked about, which was in the current fiscal year we're in now, and then the second one, which is in the next fiscal year. But the numbers are all the same. Does that make
Right.
sense?
And additionally, the state is going to hold us harmless for the drop in enrollment, the 52 students. However, we will not see those funds. They will be covered through the austerity. So part of that 1.9, that includes that.
Okay.
Okay, the budget assumptions, these assumptions are the same from last month with the addition of the 0.75 increase in TRS. Any questions on the assumptions?
Well, so let's just clarify, we did check the property tax projections are taking into account the senior homestead exemption. That was a question from last time. So we've added that in there. And then the rest of everything is the same as what it was before.
Sorry, one more question about the previous slide. When it says local 5 mil will increase, can you explain what that means, please?
So the local 5 mil, to operate in the QBE program, as far as the state funding, we're required to provide a minimum of 5 mil, and that's the funds that we receive from property tax. So at a minimum, we are required to, to receive another 500,000 on the property tax to offset that.
So this is the state's way of making sure that every school district chips in some local money, if they can't just depend on the state funding. And so it's a way of saying that, it's also a way of saying, as you increase your property tax values, you're paying a bigger share of actual dollars towards the education of students. So it's a way of kind of leveling out between property rich and property poor districts to say, because if you're in a property poor district, 5 mil is not going to be very much. And so what they do is they allocate your QBE funding and then they subtract off 5 mil and only give you the remainder. And so if you're in a property poor district, it may not have that huge of an impact because 5 mils isn't as much. If you're in a property rich district, 5 mil can be much more significant. And so you're basically funding a greater percentage of the education locally because of the higher property value.
Okay, thank you.
Every state has different ways of doing that to try to make sure that their funding is a little more equitable across the state, and that's just Georgia's approach.
Okay, are we ready for the fiscal year 22 preliminary budget review?
I think so.
Okay, James, this is what you've been waiting for. This is your preliminary fiscal year 22 budget. The first column is the current budget for fiscal year 21 and does not reflect the 1.1 million reallocation of expenses and supplies and equipment to the CARES budget. The second column is the bare bones budget. If austerity is not restored, so at worst case scenario, column 2 represents your fiscal year 22 budget. Any questions regarding those two budgets?
So I do want to just point out, you see the austerity reduction there, that line is about, I don't know, maybe 6 down from the top. And so that's that preliminary budget where we were, okay, assume you don't get anything cut off austerity, assume you still have all your same expenses, what's it look like? So that's how we started a while back. And now she's gonna talk through what the other columns represent.
Does column 2 include the bonus?
Column 2 does not include the bonus, does it?
Well, the bonus is going to be paid from federal sources, so you wouldn't
Oh.
see the bonus in this,
Well, and
budget.
it'll be FY '21.
Okay, okay.
Oh, right,
Got
right.
it.
It gets so confusing when they start messing with the current year's budget also. You gotta keep them all
Mhm.
straight.
All right.
Yeah, it definitely gets confusing. Okay, so the 3 highlighted columns represents budgets with austerity reduction included. So if you look at the third column, amended 3 includes 60% austerity restoration. So this is your fiscal year 21 budget. If you look at the 5th line down, that's the local fair share, you will see that it increased by 500,000. And you see it's being subtracted because that is what we have to provide. If you look at the next line, the 1.3, so if you compare that to the preliminary fiscal year 22 budget, it was 3.2. But after the 60% is restored, then that will leave a reduction of 1.3. So they still owe us 1.3.
Sorry, Lenita, I don't see where the QBE allotment reduction increased by 500. Oh, I do now, sorry. I'm just,
You see it,
sorry.
the 8,700,000.
Yeah, thanks.
And
Sorry.
then you see under that, that is your new reduction from austerity because now it's 40%,
Mhm.
the 40% that's remaining.
Yeah.
So for fiscal year 21, if you come down to the very bottom, you see our fund balance increase to 9.6%. From 7.9 in the first column to 9.6. And it
So that's
increased
the
because
one
of the austerity reduction, the restoration of 60%.
So if we get that 60% austerity restoration, that's what it would look like.
For this year.
For 21.
For fiscal year 21.
Excuse me, if we talk about that as a 40% austerity reduction.
It does get confusing,
It
so.
was-
It seems like-
60% austerity.
Seems like we ought to set the baseline as the full allotment, and if we're talking about,
So instead of, yeah, this is how they talk about it, is the 60%.
well, it's, and
So basically, we would.
they want to tell us that we're getting 60% more. It seems like we might appropriately say.
So
we're-
instead of losing 100% of
Exactly.
this, we're losing 40%.
I think we ought to keep the eyes on the prize.
Yeah. Or they could just make it 50 and then we can talk about it the same way.
Right.
Sorry.
Okay, so fiscal year 21, we end with 9.6%. The next 4th column is fiscal year 22, which includes the 60% austerity restoration. So you will see, again, when you look at the austerity reduction, when you look at the local fair share, you see those amounts are pretty much the same. That's your 60%. So you have it in fiscal year 21 and you have it in fiscal year 22. So your new fund balance percentage is 5.3% if we were to receive the 60%.
And just a reminder that that also includes, because you'll notice the salary line went down from the amended 3 budget FY '21 to the one she's talking about now, and that's because we hired a lot of positions only through the end of this school year that we don't anticipate needing next school year. So that's why that salary line went down. The benefits line didn't go down the same, it actually went up slightly, and that's because we have to take into account that 0.75% TRX increase. But-
Correct.
And if we close, so we're talking about the end of the school year 21, if we chose to do some type of extra work during the summer to get caught up, would that salary come from 21 or would that come
Good
from
question.
22?
So,
To
you
keep
know,
some of the
and we
teachers.
have a slide about some of those remediation things we'll talk
Right.
about, but basically, if it happens before June thirtieth, it would come out of the FY '21
June
budget.
30th.
If it happens July 1 or after, it would come out of the FY '22 budget. That's a great question. And we'll give you some examples of, some of those programs coming up in a second.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, in the final column, I just included a 50% if we were to receive 50% restoration instead of 60%. So you can see that it's a little under 5%, because we might receive 60%, but usually we don't receive what's asked for.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And remind me, the fund balance, we need to stay between 4% and 15%.
Correct. Our board policy is 4 to 15. Previously, we used to always shoot for 15, and one of the changes we made when we started budgeting more closely was we aimed more for like 10%.
Okay.
Yep.
So if we get the austerity 60% this fiscal year, then we're gonna be right kind of where we
If we
like to be
Yeah, if we
for
get
21.
if we get the 60% for this current budget and for next year's budget, we would have about a 5.3% fund balance
Okay,
with all other things being held equal.
right, okay, perfect.
And ideally, you want to have a little more, because the current situation is an example of why it's important to have a good reserve. You know, we were able to give raises, increases, and continue to operate with the increased expenses associated with COVID.
We'll talk more about that, but the good news is, as you can see in that second column of numbers, it was 1.8% when we first came to you, because we didn't
Yes.
have any of the information yet. So that at least is going in the right direction, which is a positive and a nice change of pace, so.
Correct.
So what, Tasha kind of asked, I wanted to put some numbers on it.
Yeah.
I thought we previously had a side that was like 2019, the fund balance was blank, 2020, the fund balance was blank. I just want to be, and I know before,
I don't think we have that slide here, but we can definitely add that and pull that up.
because I know we got less conservative with the budget planning in 2018, is that correct? Or maybe that was
It
the
was
year,
Maybe 2019 was the first one.
pretty
So we
recently.
did the GG method?
Yeah, it was either 2019 or 2020. We kind of, I mean, we kind of slowly moved to that direction. Each year we
Each
got a
year.
little more.
Mhm. So it
And then
wasn't like
finally
one
we
year,
went
yeah, it
Where
was
we're not
gradual.
nearly as conservative,
Okay,
but it was more of a gradual process.
okay. But your estimate, and Lenita, as you've looked back, is around 10%?
Well, when we would make the budget, we would make it around 10%.
Okay.
Is that what your question is?
Yeah.
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 Is that in reference to the fund balance percentage?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. 10% is a good number to be at.
And you and I had an extended conversation in this GSBA training about that 10%.
Right.
And how it's an interesting number because it doesn't even represent a full 2 months of no funding,
Correct,
but it is still a good emergency.
exactly.
Okay.
And we'll talk more about fund balance, because I've got some thoughts to share once we get through everything too.
Okay.
Okay.
Do
This
we-
slide contains budget consideration for decreasing expenses.
I feel like we're about to start talking about decreasing expenses. Who do we rely on for how likely these are as we make our planning, that sort of stuff?
Well, so, the tax revenue projections, we work with the projections we've used with GFU and in
Yeah.
collaboration with the city.
Yeah, I guess I just mean, that I'm familiar with.
Okay.
The GSU, the tax revenue, former budgets, that's great. The, 60%, 50%, austerity is gonna be reduced, because that's a delegation and a city thing, right? Like,
So the 60% is really like a state board of ed and/or, governor's office, those kind of things are who's making that decision. And so it really is hard. So basically what we do is I talk to other superintendents, she talks to other finance directors, we all try to read the tea leaves of how certain is this thing.
Mm-hmm.
But like so many things in politics, you don't know until it's been approved what you're gonna actually end up with.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because you both said, we feel like the bonus is likely, the austerity,
Yeah.
and I didn't know if that came from somewhere.
Well, part of the difference is, and I think maybe it was Lewis who hit on it earlier, we know the bonus is getting funded with CARES Act money, which is federal money, which has already been allocated. So that makes it feel much more certain, whereas the austerity reduction will be, when the state is putting their budget together, that is going to have to be a part of their conversation of their overall budget for everything in the state.
Right.
Because education is such a huge portion of their budget, that if they do restore 60% of what they had taken before, that's gonna be a big hit of revenue that they're gonna have to allocate to schools.
Right.
That they then can't allocate elsewhere. So that's why the bonuses feel much more certain, because it's money that's already allocated, and it's from the federal government, it's already kind of done, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is still kind of in the sausage making. So you gotta wait to see what comes out at the end.
Okay, thank
Does
you.
that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're competing with every agency in the state
Yeah.
for funds. Okay. This slide contains budget consideration for decreasing expenses. Reducing operating budgets could reduce expenses by up to 1.4 million. Administering
Before we-
stamp,
Hold on, Juanita.
I'm sorry. I think this is already clear, but because these are not baked into any of these budget assumptions that we've seen. These are all would change what's presented on the last slide.
Right, so what this is our brainstorming of, at the last meeting, we talked about, we could brainstorm, are there ways we could save some money, that wouldn't have significant impact on our program? So that's what we're about to get here. So these are just things for us to talk about and decide if we want to do them or not, and then we could reflect them in future budgets.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
okay. Administering stamp every 3 years instead of annually could reduce expenses by 27,000 annually.
So let me talk about that one just a little. So STAMP, remember, is the test that we started giving to measure foreign language proficiency. And one of our ideas is, rather than give it every single year, because especially at the younger years, our kids aren't growing that fast, instead, follow a cohort of students through the process and give it to the same kids every 3 years, so that we can measure that group of kids and then draw bigger conclusions over everything. So this one has two benefits. One, of course, it saves money, and two is it eliminates some of the testing, which we're always trying to make sure we're only giving tests we really need to give, and so that's why that one's on there.
I have a comment on that. Do we want to discuss them?
Either way, however you guys want to do it.
So, but my comment on STAMP is that I remember that we instituted this, if not directly because, but in conjunction with the decision to reduce language instruction from 5 days a week to 3 days
It
a
was
week.
shortly after that, correct?
And as we did it, it answered a board concern that we were minimizing and shortchanging the language instruction. And one of the points of discussion is that we were offering language 5 days a week, but that our program might not have been as robust as we thought that it was, and that we could improve it and provide better language instruction even at 3 days a week if we instituted some things to make sure that we're being effective. Part of that, and in fact it was a performance goal, was to ensure that we instituted some benchmark and some testing so that we would have guidelines to make sure that our program was on track, and that we were achieving what we thought we were. And it's really only maybe 1 or 2 years in, I think.
Correct, yep.
And so my concern is that I would not want to cut anything to save money, because I think it's important, it's there for a reason. I don't favor testing that we're not using, because that's stupid. But we do need a way to benchmark our program and make sure that it's being effective. And so I guess I don't like seeing this as a budget consideration. We can't tell you how to evaluate your program. It was, though, a performance goal that we were going to have this. So I'd I'd like to take this out of the budget consideration, and y'all should have the most efficient and best testing program that we need. But I wouldn't want to save it to save the $27,000.
Yeah, okay. I think that was a great summary too, that is exactly the history of where it came from. Any other thoughts on Stan?
Yeah, cut testing, when testing needs to be cut, not to save money. Well said.
Gotcha, perfect.
Does it go K through 12?
The testing itself, I can't remember if it's at K or if it starts at maybe third grade. I would have to double check.
It's
I
grades
think we picked certain grade levels. Oh, yeah, Heidi's on. Go ahead, Heidi. Where do we test it?
We've been giving it at grades 2, 4, 7, and 10. And, you know, the issue with the really little kids, it's not really sensitive enough other than to tell us they're in their beginning stages. So that's, you know, in terms of getting data every year, for the younger students, it's not telling us as much. So that was part of the idea of perhaps a 3-year cycle.
So we'll take a look at that as a part of the overall assessment calendar. One of the reasons we did it at those grade levels is because there's so many other tests that are given at like 3, 6, 9, for instance. So that's one of the reasons we did pick different years, so we wouldn't be over testing kids. But we'll take a look at it, and I think it is a good point of look at it from a standpoint of assessment planning, not necessarily budget savings. So we'll take a look at that.
David, I had a question. So can you explain for the AP and IB testing costs? You're saying that if we establish a fee structure, we'd be able to reallocate some of the funds, more funding towards families that need it. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Well, yeah, so let's talk about that one. So the high school has put together a proposal of a way that we could save money. So as you know, right now, we pay the full cost of all AP exams and IB exams, and that is highly unusual. Most school districts either pay nothing or they pay for those who really need the support the most. So there's a whole proposal behind this, which I'm happy to share with you, all the details, but the concept behind it is still pay for those kids that need it to be paid for in order to take the test and get the college credit. So their fee would be covered 100%. Kind of like a sliding fee scale, basically. And if you're able to pay it, you pay it, right? And so that's the concept behind this, because we do spend a lot of money on AP testing and IB testing, and the high school feels we definitely could use that money better in like remediation efforts and things like that, and really focus the money on, you know, the kids who need it the most. So it kind of goes along with our scholarship fund that we established this year of making sure we have money available for kids who actually need it for things. And so this is kind of the next phase of that idea of let's put our money with the kids that really need it. Part of what the high school proposes in their proposal is phasing it in, because what we don't want to do is kids are already deep into the IB program and suddenly we like pull this out from under them. So we would want to talk about maybe this isn't completely implemented all at once. Maybe we phase into it over several years. So for instance, the students who are current 9th graders haven't started their IB program yet, and so we could let them know, hey, when you start in the IB program, this is what the fee structure will look like. The students who are currently in 7th grade or 8th grade, I can't remember which, we could notify them, hey, when you get to AP, you will have to cover fees or whatever, or this is what the structure will look like. So one way we could do it is to kind of phase into it. We wouldn't have as much savings right off the bat, like what you see right here, but we could build up to it over several years if we wanted to do that.
How much are the fees per test?
Do you remember from that proposal, anybody, what the fees per test are? Or maybe Rochelle is on, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm here, Dr. Duty. It's about $120 for each IB exam.
And do
And
you happen to remember, Rochelle, for AP?
95.
I can pull it up quick, but it's just around there.
Okay.
But I'll get the number in just a second.
Was there any thought given to, like, paying for one test and then additional tests?
That would be another option, is that we could say that, and I think really what we would want to do is, if you're not completely against this idea, we would like to explore it more and, for instance, look at other IB high schools and what do they do. And I have seen plans like that where we'll pay for your first one each year, but if you're taking 5 of them, you've got to pay for the other 4 unless you have a financial need or something like that, so.
So I have the data for you guys. So just for example, this year, we would be giving 609 AP tests. Each one costs $95. That's a total of just around $58,000. For IB exams, we're giving just over 1,000 at a cost of $119 per exam. That's a total cost of about $121,000.
Rochelle,
Significant money.
the state pays for the STEM ones, so the math and science ones. But that's not a tremendous amount of money because we don't have a lot of kids taking those tests.
And Heidi, do they pay the full cost of those?
Well, every year it's a little different, but they try to get close to it. And the students with financial need can get a percentage discount as well.
Thank you. So what we feel from you guys is this one worth pursuing to look into more? It has come up in many different years just because it is a lot of money. And so would you like us to continue down that path of at least looking at some ways that we could move this direction? Or is it just a non-starter, we shouldn't even consider it? Because we don't want to invest too much time in it if there isn't some support for at least trying to look at it further.
So for my part, I'm not opposed to considering it, but I did want to note, though, that it runs counter to one of the primary early equity initiatives, which was to eliminate participation fees. And we had a big push to make sure that costs are not a barrier to people's full participation in whatever it is that might help their, push them forward. And so, and part of that was the AP IB. I get the equity concern and also agree that in the scheme of things, most of these families, it's not going to be an issue. For some, it will be. And so the essential thing is that anybody who might benefit from taking a test takes a test, and the cost is never a barrier. My only question is how you make sure that doesn't occur. The whole idea that we're phasing this in, by saying that we need to phase it in, what I'm hearing is that we actually think it might be a barrier, that people might take fewer IB exams if they knew they had to pay the cost. Once we go there, I think we're making a mistake.
Yeah, so I have a couple thoughts. First, I'd say I don't think this is contrary to the equity initiative at all, in that the whole point of this is those who need support get support, and those who don't. Now, I do not think this would be a decision-making factor for people, but the reason that we proposed looking at phasing it is because we don't want people to feel like they got the rug pulled out from under them, right? We want them to go into it with their eyes wide open of knowing what the process looks like. Kind of like when you change graduation requirements, you don't do it to juniors, you do it to freshmen, right? And then you phase it in. So that's the concept behind the phasing.
And I think I'm fine on both points, and I get the equity concern. The issue is making sure that, what happens is that you say that we're going to meet everybody's need, and then we've got this bureaucratic nightmare and the system breaks, and we don't. And so you have to make sure that it's designed in a way that people actually, it all depends on coming up with a system where you're actually making sure that people who need it get it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that, and I think the other challenge, and what this might address is, I do think there is a tendency for some students to take things less seriously when they have no skin in the game necessarily, right? So, or one of the reasons a lot of school districts don't pay for every single test is because the kid who goes to take the test, if they don't want to take it seriously, they don't have to, and they're not out anything. Why they haven't invested anything. They've invested time potentially if they took it seriously in the academics piece, So there is research to support that, and even if you're paying $10 of the $120 fee, at least you're putting something into it. It makes you engaged in it a little bit more, and it's like you've actually put something into it. So that's part of what we've been talking about with in terms of not just this, but the overall kind of sliding scale idea, is there are advantages to putting something in.
Do
so
we
that
pay
you have them.
SAT and ACT fees for one
I
test?
think some of those are covered. Heidi, for the SAT and ACT fees, can you fill us in with, about that?
We do not pay any of that, but the students who are on free and reduced lunch get to take it at a discounted or free rate depending on their status. So we do submit that information to the College Board.
And I was thinking that, because I would like to, I like the idea of the families who need support getting it and those who can afford it. And I think it could be as easy as students who have free and reduced lunch as the criteria. It doesn't have to be real complicated, so that we know that they're.
Let's push on that though. That seems like a low barrier.
It might be like that. I think that should be almost a given, but we might want to go a little further. I was just thinking of suggesting a way to phase it in to kind of see and gauge the need would be to make it like we do all the field trip fees and such, make it all, like pay if you can. Like everybody gets to take it, everybody gets to go on the field trip, pay if you can, and those who, we will see how much, how many people pay. It's a little, I think that is maybe a little more attainable for families who really might be having to make some hard decisions. They might not be on free and reduced lunch, but they may be in that really difficult middle spot where they're having to make some really tough decisions, whether their kids take these tests or not. And I think that would make it more attainable for that middle population to get this help without it being a process, an embarrassment, something they just don't do because they are not engaged or don't fill out the paperwork or whatever. And I wouldn't want to see any kids excluded or harmed for that reason. So maybe if we kind of flip it and make it allow people to pay, I think in our community it would be interesting to see, but what I've seen a lot from the field trips in the years past is that people who can pay will pay.
And often pay double,
Yeah.
right?
So
To help
maybe
cover
we
the
could-
cost for the others.
And that would make it a way, we could phase that in right away,
Yeah.
because it's not excluding anyone, and we could then gauge, maybe learn from that and see how it goes, and maybe we'll cut this cost in half or something.
I think it's a great idea, and it actually would really make it much easier to implement because it fits with, like you said, how we're doing other things like field trips.
Mhm.
I think the other advantage is it recognizes that a person's financial situation can change very quickly, right? And so at the start of the year, maybe you could have paid, and then somebody loses their job in March, and now suddenly you can't pay, but you're on the hook because you're not on free and reduced lunch, So I do like that idea, and I do think in our community, most likely it would work. We just would have to make sure that we had made it clear to people. This is why we try to separate the fee paying from the people who are actually doing the activity, because we don't want people to feel a stigma of, this is a $100 fee, I can only pay $10. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody who's doing that thing needs to know that you paid $10. It's totally separate. So that's one of the reasons we try to separate those things too. Sorry, Jane, I think you were gonna say something.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking that there could be an income, cap or whatever, in terms of students qualifying, because either way, inevitably, when students don't pay for field trips, then you gotta track them down. Hey, why haven't you paid this money? And there is still a process there, which can be embarrassing when they haven't paid. And so,
I mean, that shouldn't be happening now with the new system. That shouldn't be happening, but if it is, we'll have to follow up on it. But the idea was that the kids wouldn't be hounded like that. Although given the COVID times, we haven't had many field trips, so
Yeah.
we may have to just do a refresher on that when we start getting back.
This one's real personal. My dad refused to pay for my AP exams. I took a loan from my debate coach.
Wow.
to help cover it. Mhm.
We didn't have AP exams, so I didn't.
Well, you know, it's a lot to chisel it into the stone. So,
That was subtle, I like that.
I do like the idea of doing it like the field trips and educating the teachers to do it that way is a good start, where they
So
can pay it.
We'll explore it a little bit more, gather some information from other school districts to get a feel for how they set things up, and we'll come back to you with some more details of what that could look like and how we could approach it. Does that sound okay?
Mhm.
Sounds good.
All right, Lenita, you wanna go to the increased revenues?
Yes. This slide contains budget considerations for increasing revenue. Increasing millage rate equates to $222,000 for every 10th of an increment. Accepting tuition for non-resident students has the possibility of increasing revenue by approximately $380,000 for 68 openings.
So let's stop there real quick. So, we went back, Heidi looked at, where we had open seats over the last 3 years, just so we could get a feel. Because remember, the idea behind this concept was, if we did it, we'd only want to fill open seats, not add new classrooms.
Right.
So, she looked at there and saw that at the K2 level, there were about 38 spots you could consistently have filled. And at the 612 level, there were about 30 spots. So add a tuition of $5,500, $5,600, that's about $380,000 total. Now, we talked last time about maybe like K2 isn't the smartest spot to do it, maybe 612 would be smarter because you're not making as big of a commitment. And I'll also point out that 3 to 5 is not there because in the last 3 years, we haven't seen
Right.
like empty seats at 3, 5. That's why that's not there, which may be a consideration also for why we wouldn't want to look at K2. Because most likely, we won't have the seats when they get to 3, 5. So that's just to give you a feel, and I'm actually gonna jump into the next one as well, just because it connects to the tuition one. So we've been talking about forming this Decatur Virtual Academy so that we can continue an online option into the future. And we've learned a lot about how to do online with fidelity and how to have a really good system. And so we've been talking for a while about let's make that permanent so that it is an option. So our hospital homebound system could run into that, so they could run through the virtual academy. If other people have other needs that it would be better for them to go virtual than in person. We want to talk through whether or not that is something we should pursue. We are talking to Georgia Virtual Academy just to see if there's any opportunities for some kind of partnerships there, either learning from them, collaborating on curriculum, or even like getting seats through them that are from our students, et cetera. But the original vision was we would do this internally. We would need to start getting a feel for who would be enrolling in it and what kind of counts we're talking about. And most likely, at least at the beginning, it probably will lose money, right? It will probably cost more than the revenue it generates. The reason I connected to the other one is because you could potentially have tuition-paying students who choose to do that virtual program so that they can get a city schools of Decatur education. And so that is something to consider as well. So to me, they kind of go together, right? You've got the idea of tuition-paying students to fill about 30 possible seats in 612, but there's also the potential, if we did move forward with a Decatur Virtual Academy idea, that we could increase seats there and add some kids that are tuition paying, possibly. We don't know if they would want to come do that or not. So I just throw that out there for your consideration of what it looks like, but we estimate about $2,000 a year per student for.
So this is what all the emails and petitions are about?
I'm not sure.
Can you tell me?
I think
There's
so.
that website, and the kind of pre-written email that says, fulfill the charter.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that is okay. Yeah. And so for the tuition, right now, that number, the 379 would be based on if we did the K through 2 and the 6 through 12?
Correct, so it'd be a little less than half of that if we only did 6-12.
Half of that, okay. And then if we were able to do the 6 through 12, then they would be able to stay all the way through?
Well, we haven't decided, but I do think that's something that would fit more how we typically would handle it.
Mhm.
Once we accept you, we're gonna let you stay
Right.
until you leave, you know,
Mhm.
so.
And then the virtual students, I don't know if we've gotten down this granular, but for the virtual students potentially, would they be able to participate in extracurricular activities, all the activities that students can participate in?
Yes,
Okay.
I mean, traditionally, that's how it's done.
Traditionally, right.
Yeah.
Okay,
And having a one high school, one middle school system makes that even easier, because what happens in other school districts is they have to assign them to a high school, and they may not even all do the same athletics at the same schools and things like that, but it could basically be the Decatur Virtual Academy part of DHS, and the Decatur Virtual Academy part of RMS, et cetera.
right. Okay.
So you said, so the virtual academy, is it just for 6 through 12?
Not necessarily, it could be at all grade levels, and I think ultimately we would want it to be at all grade levels if we're gonna do it, with the vision of it being its own full school. We would wanna do it from K through 12. We might wanna consider starting it at upper grades and then maybe phasing in lower grades. But part of it is also, if there's a chance that we're gonna have any significant number of kids next year who still want to be virtual.
Yeah.
It's gonna be really challenging, doing that if we don't have something like this in place.
Yeah.
And trying to run it at the school level like we do now is gonna be challenging next year, because we're anticipating having most of our students back in the classrooms.
Yeah, so like, the cost at 2,000 students per year, let's say we had, like you said, 30 seats, 6 through 12, $60,000 is what we're talking about? Is it-
I think those costs are actually the cost for Georgia Virtual School, maybe? Do you know, Juanita?
No, Rochelle might know.
I do not.
Okay, I'm just trying to get an idea of what the cost is, because if it's in that order of magnitude, then I think it kind of goes back to the point Louis was making earlier. If this is something we think we should be doing, let's do it. Let's evaluate how to do it. Maybe now we capitalize on the momentum that we have, and like you said, we might have carryover need next year from the current situation. It also might solve some of the conversation we've had before about disciplinary types of action.
Correct, that's right.
So this could serve several purposes. And the cost to me isn't really gonna make or break this budget, but it sounds like it might be a good idea to do it and to look into what it would cost and perhaps do it for that reason.
Well, let me give you a feel just for, like, if we did bare bones, like, let's assume we're not gonna have that many kids, but we have to have something.
Yeah.
So I'd say at a minimum, you'd need like a K-2 teacher who teaches a multi-grade classroom,
Mhm.
K-2. You would need a 3-5 teacher who teaches a multi-grade 3-5 classroom. You would need some, like, you might need one math teacher, one science teacher who's covering like 6-12 coursework. Or, as the kids are getting into more specialized courses, you may need to say, all right, we need to find a teacher who we can designate one of their periods at the high school, they're actually teaching virtually as part of the virtual academy, and then the rest of the periods they're teaching in person. So, as the kids get older, you might have to specialize a little more and not have dedicated teachers who only do virtual. But yeah, at a minimum, I think if you had very few students, you could do it by doing some multi-grade classrooms at the lower levels, at the lower grade levels, and then expand into the more specialty as you go.
If you could open it to people, I like the idea a lot. It seems like a thing that we ought to pursue, and that there'd be a lot of benefits,
Yep.
and both budgetary and otherwise. So I'm in favor of it. It seems like it would be neat if you could even open it to like homeschool kids who
Right.
want the language enrichment or, whatever it is, so that people could not actually be fully enrolled, but they could kind of have a cafeteria plan. maybe for a fee,
Yeah.
or maybe not, I don't know.
Let me see what our options are, if we can do that or not. So why don't we flesh it out a little bit more, and put together some more solid numbers of what it might look like. The one variable is how many people, right? So what we may do is put together a couple scenarios, like if it's a bare bones number of people, here's the minimum we would have to have. Of course, as you have more people, it gets more efficient, and so the incremental cost doesn't necessarily go up as quickly, but that way we can start to just get a feel for maybe 3 different scenarios of how many people enroll, and then also take into account if we were able to, we'll double check on, if somebody enrolls from out of the district as a tuition paying student, do they have to be a full-time, or could they like enroll as a 1 period or something? We'll check on that.
It's just a thought, whatever.
Yeah.
What happens to CE? Do we get money?
So you would get QBE for these kids, so that's one of the reasons that it's advantageous to have an actual program. It's because you're getting QBE for those kids just like you would if they were sitting in your seats.
That's
physically.
huge.
Even if they just did a class, like, does the cafeteria plan?
That's the part I don't know about, yep.
And I would also wonder, like, I would also just be thoughtful of, we wouldn't want to erode our QBE by offering something where, I guess, people would be doing more like a hybrid, and then we would lose student population, because that would be counterproductive to this budgetary.
Can you tell, I'm missing, how would it lose?
If we allowed kids to take a course,
Oh, yeah.
and they were otherwise homeschooled, but then we lost the QBE,
Right.
it would be counterproductive to our budgetary goal here of making this, an increased revenue proposition.
Right, I gotcha.
Yeah.
So it's here, there's an upcoming meeting with Georgia Virtual School.
Yep.
It came online about the same time as the charter was written. I was just kind of under the impression that that's why it existed, because QBE wasn't available for virtual programs anymore.
No, I think it's because most school systems don't have their own virtual program, so that was the alternative for people who wanted a virtual program.
Okay.
Yep.
Go
And then with that, sorry, thanks, and would there be a different cost for our students that live in the district but want to go virtual versus kids that don't live in the district and want to go
It
virtual?
would just be that tuition difference, and so.
It would be, okay.
It would be handled the exact same way as if they were, a tuition-paying physical present student.
Okay.
Versus a tuition-paying virtually present student.
Okay.
Yep. All right, so we'll dig into that more and bring some more concrete scenarios to you guys, so we can decide if that's something we want to pursue right away or not, and where that's gonna fall in the whole thing, so that's helpful.
I have a comment on the millage rate, proposition.
Yeah.
Because the budget may or may not end up having the austerity restoration that we anticipate, perhaps that could be reserved, or if that doesn't, like, we could budget for the 60% austerity restoration, and then just have as a caveat, if we don't get that money from the state, then that could be our, basically, Plan B, because, like, if it went from a 60 to a 50% restoration, that's the difference of about $1.45 million, which would be, is that right?
Let me find it real quick, I think you're right. It's a difference of, oh shoot, where is this?
Yeah, only about $325,000.
Correct, for 60% versus 50%, it's about 320.
Yeah, so that's only a difference of just over $300,000, which would, you know.
Like a tenth or 2/10 of a
Exactly.
mil.
So like, we could almost maybe not remove a variable, because it's still a variable, but make the assumption that that's how we would accommodate for it, so that we can more precisely plan on an assumed austerity restoration, with this being kind of our, you know, plan to fill the bucket if it needs to be filled.
Yeah, and let's talk more about that in a second after we talk about the remediation programs, because I think that's all gonna tie together.
Okay.
Any other questions so far up through the budget considerations? All right, Lenita, you want to start, with just a review of those board budget considerations that we've put together as we've gone through the process?
Okay, and just to note, board budget considerations are based on the district's current situation and not based on the legislative priorities, since we know from past actions that they are subject to change. So we have the remediation programs, which we will be discussing in the next slide. Step increase for all eligible employees in order to maintain a competitive salary within the metro area district, and that will equate to approximately $670,000. If the board elects to give bonuses to employees that are not included in the $1,000 state bonus, that would be approximately $143,000. And of course, the goal is always to maintain a fund balance of 4% at the minimum.
So I want to talk about that third one just real quickly to make clear what that is. So in the past, for instance, when there was the $2,000 salary increase on the table, that did not apply to everyone who we would have thought it applied to. And so we supplemented that funding to apply it to everyone who we would consider a teacher. And so we wanted to make sure you knew that if, let's say the $1,000 bonus does happen, it is very targeted to specific employees. If you wanted to include the other employees that the state is not paying for, it would be about $143,000. Does that make sense? That's what that one is. And that would have been, that is the current fiscal year. So we just wanted to make sure you knew, since that comes up frequently when we have these programs that exclude some people and include others. So that's what that one is.
And for the one that happened in the past, what were some of those that we ended up?
So for instance, and I can't remember for sure, but for instance, I think the $2,000 was for like classroom teachers, but it didn't include, if I remember right, like speech language pathologists, for instance, who are doing very similar work in the classroom with the kids, but they wouldn't have gotten the funding, and so we supplemented it to make sure they did. Is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I mean. Mm-hmm.
And then, I don't know, we're guessing if they do this state bonus based on what they've announced so far, we're guessing which employees it applies to, and so there's about 143 employees it wouldn't apply to then, is where that number's coming from.
And which are those? I did think that it was supposed to be central office staff that was excluded.
I think it basically is central office people. I think the way I read it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Lenita or anybody else who knows, its focus is on the school-based personnel, but I do think there's other groups, like you brought up, the bus drivers, the student nutrition custodians, that stuff. I think it's also including them, but it wouldn't include like the school psychologists whose home base is Wilson Center and they serve 3 schools, right? But it wouldn't include those kind of folks.
Okay.
And the operations folks who work at the central office. And we could get the full list. We just wanted to make sure you knew kind of what that would look like. So if we get to that point, and we could bring you much more specific.
Yeah, the only thing, I mean, my only thought on it, number one, I'm not a fan of bonuses. I think if you want to increase people's salary, give them a cost of living adjustment. But just as, I don't think that that's smart budget policy, number one. I don't have a particular opinion, but I know that this is, the stated purpose of this grant is supposed to be, as I understand it, that the in-school teachers or the on-site personnel are spending money for COVID mitigation stuff. I think it's sort of like if you're having to buy your own PPE or something. At least that's how I heard it described.
I haven't heard that, but that doesn't surprise me.
That could have been someone's gloss and they didn't know what they're talking about. So I don't know that for sure. But I guess I'd ask the question, why are we, what's the purpose of the bonus?
Yeah.
And is there a rationale for excluding some people and not others? Yeah,
and as it's been described right now, it doesn't matter whether you're teaching in person or teaching virtually, whether you get the bonus.
Right. As I heard about it, I thought I wasn't sure it made sense to begin with.
So we should know more about it by the time we get back together at the February meeting, and so we can get you some more details.
Yes, and I think the reason that it's a bonus is because it's one-time money. Like the CARES is not just recurring every month, every year, so it's one-time money. So that's why they just suggested a bonus.
Right.
All right, so one of the big things we spent some time looking at is what can we do with remediation in order to bring some of our students back from the slide that they've had during this part. Shana, can you go to the next slide? So these are just some of the ideas. Some of these we do to some extent already, so it's just expanding them. Some of them are brand new ideas, and I'll share with you some thoughts on which I think are probably most effective, and which maybe won't be quite as effective. So we've got the summer school at DHS, which we have, every year we do summer school at DHS. We use a program called Apex to do credit recovery, and right now they have about 4 times the number of students that are failing courses at the high school as normal. And so this is a way to put some extra time and effort in with those kids to try to get them the credit for the courses so that they don't fall behind. And the approximate cost there is about $150,000. So that would be just high school, and it's really focused on those kids who are failing courses right now so they can end up getting credit. The summer school K-8.
Just one question, the 4 times, that's in our high school or that's statewide?
I think that's in our high school, is that right, Rochelle?
Yes, that is correct. I don't know if it's that much higher, Dr. Duty, but I can look at the report that I sent to Christy and give you that number in a second.
Okay.
That'd be really, I would like to know that number regardless.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The summer school K-8 would be a new idea where we are providing that summer enrichment, and what we're picturing would be like some targeted instruction 3 hours a day, 3 days a week. So the kids still have summer, but they're also doing some extra enrichment activities. And so we just guessed that, let's say we did 20% of our students, of those who have struggled the most, to give them that extra time, and that would cost about $100,000 to do that. And again, that is just, we have not done an analysis to get to that 20%. We're just doing that based off of what the principals are seeing as they look at their data and at their kids. That's where that 20% came from. The adding in some extended school day services in the next school year. So typically, we serve 300 students a year, but doubling that. So we have some extended day services. So after the school day's over, some kids could stay and get extra help. And so that would be remediation in the school year, next school year. And we estimate to do that would be about $75,000. One idea is using those days during fall break and winter break and providing some really targeted instruction, again, about 3 hours a day for those 5 days. And we figure if we could serve, say, 100 students, that'd be about $15,000 for each of those weeks to do that. So that's one way to find some extra time. And just to clarify, some of these, we may want students to do multiple ones of these for some kids who really need extra support. And for other kids, we may need them to just do one of them, and then they could move on. Not all of this would be all the kids. The Saturday school is a remediation and tutoring program that a lot of school districts do, where they offer a 3-hour session on Saturday. And we also thought one thing we've seen successful is you offer this boot camp in August and September to just really get them going for 6 weeks. And that's about $100, or 100 students for 6 Saturdays would be about $20,000. So that's another idea of finding some time for kids to get just really targeted instruction as the school year starts. I'm going to skip the second to last one and come back to it in a second. And then the next one is the in-school intervention, the increase of the data-driven interventions in the school setting, and do some more targeted intervention during the school day, and making sure we just have consistent quality resources. We don't think that's going to be much additional cost. There may be some cost for some training and some products, but we think we can offset those by doing things consistently across the district, for instance, at all 5 K2s, and not do different things at every school. And so that's, we think we can do some of that just through efficiencies. So I just wanted to share that that's on the list as well. Not everything is extra outside of the school day. And then the second to the last one I think personally is by far the most effective of all of these things, but it's also the most expensive, and that is adding additional teachers who would be present in the schools to provide extra instruction as needed. So, some of it may be used to reduce class size, some of it may be used to reduce, or to offer more services during the school day while the kids are there, pull them out of class, provide some services, maybe push into the class to provide services, things like that. So the concept here is if we added a teacher at each grade level at each school, K-5, we'd need about 21 more teachers, and that's about $1.5 million. So by far the most expensive one, but also probably the most effective of all of those ideas that are there. So just wanted to give you a feel for some of the ideas that are out there, get your thoughts in terms of how much are we willing to invest in the remediation. I think we could very easily do every single one of these things and still have needs. And the more of them we do, the more we're going to be able to address what those needs are more quickly. So just some thoughts. Would love to get your ideas of which of those things, like how do you feel about spending that kind of money on this? How do you feel about, having kids come in the summer, having kids come in on Saturdays, that kind of stuff, if you have any thoughts.
I like all of the ideas. But I wanted to ask about Saturday school. Is that just for high school, or what grades would Saturday school are you looking to address?
Can someone remind me? I cannot remember that proposal off the top of my head, Jana. Does somebody else know what the specifics of that one was?
I couldn't find unmute. I apologize. But
Okay,
it's across the grade levels. It isn't exclusively for the older students.
all right. Thank you, Kimberly.
You're welcome.
My initial feeling was, the summer, it seems like an opportunity we should not waste.
Yep.
And the sooner we start remediating, the better. So I feel like those first two options seem like we must do them. And the other options seem like a lot of bang for the buck, really. Then, like you said, the reducing class size, I think we might just need to be a little more precise about that, because we typically have pretty low class sizes in general in our school system. And we might find that adding a para, being extra hands, and we've had very wonderful, very qualified, extraordinary paras,
Yep.
might be much more affordable. My concern is also how to undo that.
Right.
So if we hire 21 teachers for one school year, like, I wouldn't want us to then let them all go. And so that's not just a one-time cost for this year to get remediated. Then we're also kind of taking that on going forward, and we've also set expectations for what class sizes should be, which may or may not be realistic. So I guess I like the general concept of giving more one-on-one attention to kids, but maybe there's a more precise way that we can do it.
Okay.
I think I agree, and I think for all the lower costs, we should do them all, because the cost looks small enough relative to the benefit. So, and then I think we should strongly consider the class size option too. You had said that you thought that was the most effective, and we're looking at doing all of the above. That's a mill. That's what that is.
Yeah.
A little bit less. Whether we, I don't know, but I think we should consider it. And I'd note that we've already got teachers that we've hired temporarily. And so it could be keeping them on, or it could be keeping them on for a year under the same terms that we're currently doing it. So if we, it goes back to your judgment about if this is an appropriate thing to do for all the remediation that's needed. I think we should strongly consider incurring the cost.
Well, let me share a couple thoughts, because I also was worried of, like, let's say we added these teachers and what does happen. So I had a couple thoughts. One, I do not think it would be a one-year expense. I think we would have to anticipate adding them, and maybe as we naturally have attrition of positions and shift people around and whatnot, over several years, we go back to more of a level that we're at now. There are two concerns with that. One, of course, the cost continues in future years, as you were talking about, Heather. But I also don't think the needs are gonna go away in 1 year. I think if we think that just because we put all these resources into 1 year, we can suddenly get all these kids back to where they would have been, I don't think that's realistic. I think they have been out of traditional school for a year now almost. And so it's not like you can just undo that instantly. And so one of the ideas would be you add them in, you don't keep adding more teachers, and you use them to backfill teachers as they retire or as they move out of state or whatever, right? So you kind of naturally get back to a different staffing level over the course of several years. Or we could do like Lewis was saying of the people we hired right now, we said, your contract ends at this end of the year. It's not a renewable contract. We could do something like that. You do get different people applying then, potentially. They know that this is their chance to show us what they can do, and it's quite possible some of these folks will get hired into positions that come open as people transition. So those are all things we want to think about for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the gist of it.
For what it's worth, I like the attrition idea better.
Yeah.
And I like all of these ideas. I think that we should, as much as we can, push all of these forward. I know that's a conversation I've had, and I'm sure you all have with the community on, what are we gonna do going forward? So I think those are all good. I would be curious to know if we kept the teachers on that we've already hired, maybe even not even in just a contract position, but for something more permanent, if that cost is the same based on if we keep the ones we have now. So I'm just wondering, are you thinking that's the same thing, or could it be less, or would that be about the same?
It would be about the same either way.
Okay.
And again, we are estimating here because part of it depends on what degree does that teacher have, how many years experience do they have. So we're just going with an average with our estimate. The other thing I'd point out is, obviously, if you're doing a teacher per grade per school, that is, so at a K-2 school, you're getting 3 more teachers, right? At a 3-5 school, you're also getting 3 more teachers, but you've got 2 or 3 times as many students. So the other thing we may want to look at is not just 1 per grade, but maybe at the 3-5 schools, you might have to do, say, 2 per grade or something like that. We may have to look at that a little bit more carefully.
That's why I'm confused, because we use, and the only answer to this class size emails and questions that we're getting is that you have consistently defended and used the budget matrix where schools, are you talking about breaking that, or are you talking about just giving them an extra number for the principals to work with?
We are talking about basically just giving them an extra for this period that we provide the extra.
Because that's the answer you gave me 4 years ago,
Correct.
Similar to Dr. Robinson, when I was like, where are the paras going? I was like, that's a principal level decision.
Correct.
And so if Glenwood is 17-1 in kindergartners to teachers, that's the principal has over-prepared paras and under-prepared elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're just saying, fix the budget, give them a little more staff to work with.
Give them more staffing points, basically.
Okay, because I like that better. I don't like 1 more teacher for every building. That's terrible for Oakhurst, right? Where there's 9 classes? That's an exaggeration, versus our smaller schools. But the budget fix, I could be on board, because it allows the principals the autonomy to fix this.
And I want to make sure I'm understanding correctly, you like the idea of it being more proportional to the size of the school, what resource you're getting, is that right?
I thought you were an idiot the first time we talked, because I was like, where are the paras going? And Diana defended you because of the way the budget works, is you give our schools a formula, and then they pick and choose and put it where their needs meet.
Yep.
And so if a school doesn't have paras, it's because the principal didn't think that it met the pedagogical needs of that building and that school and the media center assistant, et cetera. And it's really beautiful when you get down to the nitty and gritty.
Yeah.
So honestly, I was shaking my head, like, what does it look like to throw an extra teacher into a building?
Right.
But if it looks like just tweak your formula to up the staffing decisions, okay, that could be cool.
Right.
I think that's a good way to do it, because that alleviates the disparity of the bigger schools versus the smaller schools.
Right, but, and that's the budget deal, you know, when I would hear from like, one of the part parents, like, oh, we have four teachers, like, well, you should talk to your principal about that, because that means you may have extra support in, you know, outreach, or you may have extra support here.
Exactly.
You have the same dollars and staff per kids in all of these buildings,
Right.
guaranteed. Throwing an extra teacher for every class doesn't do that, but this could, and allows it to focus where it needs. So if Principal Lofstrand identifies a particular need, because that first box that's scary. My breath's still taken away from that.
Yep.
Like, if
So-
you had told me that we need to increase sorry.
Well, I was just going to give you guys just some numbers because I know you were a little blown away by the failures. I don't have the 1920 compared to 2021 in front of me. So I will get working on that tomorrow, and I'll send you all those numbers. I can tell you at the 12-week grade report, we had 652 students who had a 1 or a 2 failing 1 or more grades. Since 12 weeks, we've done extensive outreach to families. I've set some expectations as far as communication. We wrote a proposal. We have students coming in twice a week. Our teachers worked hard for HOPE plans, and we have decreased that now to 265 students who are failing 1 or more classes. So I will look at those numbers compared to last year, and I will get you guys that report.
Wait, did you just say that you all had 652 and you're down to 265?
Yes, sir.
Holy.
Wow.
And I would say that's happening all over the district at all grade levels. There's just been a lot of effort put in to finding those kids who are struggling and getting them the extra resources. So I love hearing the numbers, Rochelle, thank you, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I would love to know what some of those numbers are in all the schools, and
Yeah.
that's something to really, you know, put out there, especially when we're hearing from parents that we have kids failing and you guys are doing nothing about it. And, you know, we definitely are hearing that,
We will try
so
to pull that together for a bunch for all the grades.
please, yeah, that's great news.
On that same thread, failing or not failing, I don't know where that may or may not be subjective. And we've talked about how, you know, we have really emphasized empathy and that kind of thing. So I'm also interested in knowing what are we anticipating in terms of, like, more, I guess, standardized comparisons for how our students are performing this year versus last year and the year before, to kind of see, well, it's good that they're not failing, but are we also achieving at the same level?
So what I would say is, yes, we have that idea of compassion over compliance, and yes, we're trying to be empathetic and all those things. I have not seen that means the standards are lowered. It means that we're much more understanding when, hey, that kid didn't get that summative done on time, right? What else can we do to support them to help get it done? Or this kid has not been logging into class and has therefore missed these 4 activities. What can we do to set up times to get them caught up and back on track? So what I have seen is the standards and the rigor has remained very similar to what it was. There's just been a lot more effort put into the support side of things because of all the challenges the virtual environment has provided.
Okay, and I love hearing that, and I assume that that's happening. But then the second part of my question is, at what point are we gonna really be able to measure the achievement?
Yeah, it's a good question, and part of the challenge is when you stop doing standardized tests, as much as we all don't like standardized tests, they're one way of knowing how kids are achieving. And so, we will update you soon on what the plan is for standardized tests through the end of the year, so we'll see what data we have that is more objective from third parties and whatnot. But right now, that is very difficult to answer because we canceled so many tests at the state level and local level, so.
Yeah, and I realize it's kind of a, plus and minus, because whatever time we take to give the standardized test, we're taking away from instruction and
Exactly, that's always the
learning.
balance.
I'm not pushing lots of standardized tests necessarily, but I think, you know, we need to be, I just am interested to know what that's gonna look like and how we're gonna approach that and balance that.
Yeah. And I'll tell you just anecdotally, I would bet we won't really feel like we're back to normal with standardized testing till next year. So
Okay.
it may be something where we don't have that measurement right away come this spring. It may be into the next year when we really start to have hard data.
Did that decision to keep the milestones stick and just have them count for less?
You know what, I cannot remember.
Because the last I heard, I
Heidi,
think that.
do you remember what happened with what percent it has to account for, end of course and all those kind of things? Whatever happened with that?
Can you repeat the question, please?
So you know there was all that talk about the governor, or not the governor, the state superintendent changing what percent the test counts in end of course and end of grade exams and all that.
It counts
and then
less
back and
than,
forth.
it counts less, oh, sorry.
Go
Well,
ahead.
it counts less than 1%, but they've also submitted another waiver to request no tests, that we don't have to give it this year. So we'll have to wait and see what that looks like.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
thank you.
On the subject of class sizes, how does this, I've never been completely clear what's going on with all the emails and complaints we're getting about virtual class sizes. And we've had a series of emails where you provided the average class sizes, which are reasonable and not that big. And then apparently, from what I can understand, there are just some exceptional cases where some of these classes are actually way bigger than the norm. But don't take that from me. I'm asking you a question. What's going on with that? And the whole thing about using the formula, which is a great formula to distribute resources, but if it results in these wild disparities.
Well, I mean, that's a very different situation. The staffing formulas we've used for years now, that's a very different situation than what we're facing with the in-person versus virtual. It's not, I mean, it's not like we're using the same staffing formulas to do that. Does that make sense?
It does.
We're using the existing staff and then trying to supplement with the additional people.
So the COVID challenge is about who's virtual, who's online. It's just a whole different ball of wax, and we don't need to worry that that's going to happen again.
Correct.
Now,
Regarding specific classes, I do not know. I'll have to find out about that. So what you're saying is, we're hearing there are classes where there are not the additional resources there. They really are just that much bigger without additional support. Is that?
I'm not telling you that.
No,
I'm saying
that's what
people are
we're
telling us that in these emails.
Let me follow up on that.
And I've been very confused about what to believe
Okay.
is correct, or what
I will check with our principals to see what's happening there.
somebody else might understand better than I.
Yeah, no, I've heard some of the same things. So, yes, it would be nice to just kind of see what's going on, if that is the case, the fact that, you know, it's there.
We'll get some more detail on that. And
Okay.
I know Maggie was also working on answering the question about, where have we put the resources, where we've either hired new people or, extended days, because remember, some, like special teachers offered to do more, and so they're getting paid a stipend. So we're pulling that together. I think you had asked about that, James. So we're pulling those numbers together as well. So we'll have those for you, and we'll get some more details on the class size. And with this one as well, we will, I appreciate the feedback on all of these proposals, but especially that, second to last one there. We'll pull together some more detailed information of what it would actually, what it could look like in practice, and talk to the principals to a little bit more of, there are probably situations where, well, they'd rather have two paras than one teacher, right? And what's awesome here is we often get paras who actually have teaching licenses, right?
Yeah.
But they choose to work as a para, or they want to teach eventually here, but they'll start as a para, right? And get their foot in the door, that kind of stuff. So let me talk to the principals a little bit more about that, and we'll flesh out some details on all these, so.
Okay.
On the last slide, I would just want to talk through, real quick, just kind of hitting on those challenges we talked about throughout this, but I am worried that we may have COVID expenses into the next school year. We are really uncertain about how fast is this vaccine gonna roll out, how effective is the vaccine gonna be, how much are we still gonna have to quarantine and mask up and social distance. There's still a lot of unknowns, so I'm worried that if we budget too close, that we will not have the flexibility like that we had this year to actually solve the problems. With the reduction in enrollment, yes, they're holding us harmless, but they're doing it in a way that it's not like they're just providing you the same funding. They're saying, we're holding you harmless because we're giving you this other money, which we would have given you anyway if you hadn't lost students. And so, to me, it's kind of a red herring, I guess, if I'm using that correctly.
So our QBE goes down, you're saying, because it's still based on how many kids you get.
So your QBE, I think your QBE will go down, but because they're giving you that austerity, they're taking less for austerity, they're saying that's now making up for that. This is our understanding of how it's gonna work. So that makes me nervous, because that's not really holding you harmless.
Not at all.
Obviously, we still have the variables of the state funding, which hopefully will get some certainty fairly soon here. So I share all that because we still don't have we're not taking advantage of this opportunity to become more competitive in our salaries. And I want to make sure that you guys know that's not part of the budget right now, right? We're just talking basic, though I think the only thing in here is maybe a step increase in one of the versions, right? That's not going to get us to the point of being more competitive. And I don't want that to fall off the table for consideration, because since we have gotten some good news that the austerities may not be quite as big of cuts as they were planning on, that some of the expenses are changing, whatever, I don't want us to forget that one of the things we are hoping to do is, if we are ever in this situation, this would be our chance to catch up to other school districts to be competitive on our salary schedules. And so I would really like to put some numbers together for you to show what that could look like. And it probably would mean having to look at our millage rate. And so we haven't put it here because I want to know if that's something you're okay with us at least looking at, to see and to get a feel for how much improvement would that make for us, right? And then the other thing that we want to bring to you next time is the 5-year projection of budget. Because one of the concerns always is, how does your budget this year, assuming things remain similar in future years, what happens over time? Are you eating into your fund balance? Are you building your fund balance, et cetera? So we'll be bringing that next time, but I do want to share, I think there are some things where we may want to be a little more cautious, and we may want to say, all right, maybe we don't, we've had the conversation of, we don't have to build up the fund balance instantly, right? Which I still agree with. But maybe we need to still be shooting in the budgeting process for a higher fund balance than what we're currently shooting for, because that was our safety net that allowed us to keep operating at the levels we operated. We used that entire fund balance basically, right? And so there's so much uncertainty still. It makes me a little nervous to say, hey, we think that as long as everything goes really well and perfectly, we're fine doing this. I'm not sure this is the year to do that. And so if it's okay with you, I'd like to bring you some numbers that show taking advantage of this time period when others aren't giving salary increases to try to get caught up, and what that might look like in terms of dollars. Maybe being a little bit more aggressive on rebuilding our fund balance, at least for this coming year, just so we have a little more cushion. So if, God forbid, we have a lot more COVID-type expenses, we're more prepared for it. If it's okay with you, I'd like to bring some of those scenarios next year at the February meeting, along with the 5-year projections. Does that sound okay with all of you?
Sure.
Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, it makes sense.
Sure,
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, I would be curious to see what that could potentially look like. I mean, I get nervous when we talk about going up on the millage, but,
Absolutely.
you know, it should at least be something that we look at and explore and agree as a, board and a body that maybe that's not what we want to do, but let's not say no to what we don't know, you know?
All right, so we will bring that to the next, go ahead, James,
I
sorry.
mean, that's why I'm so interested in what we expect and see from the state.
Yeah,
I mean, when you have a financial conversation in this state, there are many counties and counties that rely on the QBE funding for 90
yeah.
to 95% of what they've done. And so most of the assessments, when we talk about in the training we sat in, the notion that the state could do this for multiple years in a row and put systems in this position is not,
Right.
is not possible.
Right.
Well, but wait a second, they did it for like a whole decade.
They did. They did.
And I think that's why we're worried about it, because there's precedent for it not going
It
away.
was only, what, 2 years ago that they finally
Yeah.
got rid of the austerity cut that we
Yeah.
had for.
Well, and to Lewis's point, as they got rid of the austerity cuts, they spun it as increasing the money to you. And that's why we were so diligent about saying, you're not increasing the money to us, you're not taking as much money away.
And that's
Exactly what your point was. So-
to clarify, that's why I asked 16, 17, 18, when we go back, what was our fund balance then?
Right.
Because I know that there were, obviously I know that there were austerity cuts to the budget back then or whatever and stuff like that, but this was a massive middle of March.
Do you wanna know?
Yeah, I'd love to know what that austerity.
So, you know, it was in the 20% range the entire time. From 2012 to 2020, it ranged from 22% to 29%.
In the QBE formula?
Just in the fund balance percentage of annual budgeted expenses,
I'm sorry,
not QBE.
She's talking about the
just
fund balance percent, our local fund.
our local fund balance. Oh, so,
Was that the ending fund balance or the percent of our budget paid for through the fund?
That was the ending fund balance,
Ending.
I believe, if you're looking at what I think you are.
29%?
2014.
Because remember, we budgeted so conservatively, we always ended up with much higher fund balance than we
And
anticipated.
then taking it and putting it somewhere else because we were over what we were supposed to be over, so.
Exactly.
My only concern on the budget stuff,
Thank you.
I think we need to be doing all the things that you want to do. If it came to a choice between the increased staff to reduce the student-teacher ratios for the next, as a remedial measure, between that and being aggressive on the salary catch-up, I would choose the remediation.
Yeah.
I would also be more favorable to the millage increase to pay for it.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
That's where I am.
All right, any other budget questions? All right, Lenita, did we miss anything that we should have covered?
No, I think we had a very productive conversation.
All right,
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you for good explanation.
As always.
That was
You're
very
welcome.
good.
thanks, Lenita. Okay, so the next thing is accreditation, so this should be pretty quick. Let me share my screen real quick here. All right, so hopefully you can see it now. Is it big enough to read?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, this is these are the accreditation standards that we talked about at the last meeting. Maggie and I went and brainstormed, some potential pieces of evidence that could be used for these things. And so basically, I just wanna walk you through what we think, we could use for accreditation. And if you either don't like any of our ideas or you have new ideas, we'd love to hear them. And then that can help us get ready for that process. So, and Maggie, I'm not sure if you're online or not, but she can help us. That first column, I learned those letters all stand for things that change how you interpret the concept, so she may have to jump in here. But So the concept of the governing authority and institution leadership engage in the ongoing and systematic development, review, and revision of policies. And remember, this is over a 5-year period. So part of what we have to remember is we're not just talking about during this crazy year of COVID. We're talking about 5 years, what have we done in that area? And so we've got our whole new board policy manual and all those updates we did early on, frequently there. And we've got our character ends policy that we updated to reflect the IB learner profile. So those are some pieces of evidence related to that. Things we could do better is setting a calendar for review. We've talked about this before of we should just have a calendar to regularly say, all right, let's look at section 1, let's look at section 2, let's look, is there anything we need to change, et cetera?
Didn't we start that?
We did that. We did start it, we need to get back to it.
Yeah,
Exactly.
okay.
I think it's imperative to get back to it, like, it's the next meeting, we need to pick one and start.
I agree. For processes about ongoing and current compliance with laws and regulations, best practices, holding itself accountable, the governance authority holding itself accountable for committing to policies that ensure integrity, effective operations, and improve student learning. So for the legal pieces, we have our attorneys review our policies. We have subscriptions to the various services that let us know as the laws change, do we need to update policies? And then we've got our annual legal training that we either get as part of our mandatory training or we attend extra training on just those legal updates through GSBA. So those are some examples of evidence we could provide.
For what it's worth, the monitoring schedule would fit nicely on that line as well as.
On this one?
Above. I might put it in what we could do better, but.
Yeah, gotcha. Any other thoughts on that one? I'm gonna put it in both spots so I don't forget.
Does that have anything to do, I mean, would it be something to mention that we redid our code of conduct there?
Yes.
We just redid that this year. And we review that each year.
Yep. Okay. All right, the process to collect and use evidence to monitor and ensure adherence to policies is implemented by the institution and used to inform revisions. So this is really what that policy monitoring calendar was about. And what we can do better is get back on schedule. Okay. This next one we think is definitely a growth area, so we didn't even put any evidence. Longitudinal data and evidence show adherence to policy and effectiveness of policy review and revision. So because a lot of these changes happened right before COVID, and then we've kind of fallen off the ship a little bit during COVID, we think that and you don't have to have evidence for everything. What's important is to be honest with them and say, we don't really have longitudinal data. We can't, but can you think of any longitudinal data we have that might be applicable there?
No,
Okay.
but I think that I guess what I'd say about this is that I think that the work that we've done over the past 3 years has been 100% to implement exactly what's being requested here.
Right.
So it seems to me that we have a story to tell.
Yep.
Which is that we recognize that this is where we need to be. We've set a plan and we've made substantial progress toward implementing it. We're not there yet. The dadgum virus got in the way. It wasn't the only thing that got in the way.
Correct. Yep.
But so it's in progress, but we're actually, we've made a lot of progress toward doing exactly that.
Yep. And I think that's exactly the story that we tell, and I think that's exactly what they want to know. They don't expect you to be perfect. They just want to see that you take it seriously.
Yeah, I think we had a plan and a process and we started it because we had several meetings where we were reviewing the ARs that were linked to the policy. So we didn't not do it. We did actually have a process and a plan and started doing it. So I think that's something to share.
Yeah, and because it was so new, we were even tweaking that process.
Yeah.
We're in the midst of tweaking that process too.
I think we've done more intentional work in this direction than like anybody could fathom.
Yeah, I agree.
So, just haven't gotten there.
The final item in that section, governing authority commits to the establishment and adherence to policies that promote the effective operation of the institution and improving student learning. So this, I can't remember what EM stands for, but basically the idea is, what would be a good question they could ask us that gets to that? And so we thought one possible question is, what role do the ENS policies play in everyday decisions for schools? Would be an example of, like, ask our principals how ENS policies influence them in making their day-to-day decisions, would be an example.
I think that, you know, the very deliberate, intentional look at ENS policies, but also the move to integrate ENS policies with our strategic plan so that the two are basically aligned and part of the same thing, which it hadn't been before, right?
Good, perfect.
And you took that one step further, because you took our strategic plan and actually made it actionable and assigned all the items to particular people and monitored whether it got done or not. I mean, you had an incredible, what's it called, Gantt chart?
Yeah.
So that was no small feat.
Awesome, we'll work that in there. And then 1.5 is about adheres to code of ethics and it functions within defined role. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Back up there?
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk about how some of the initiatives like your school funding, it seems like that does flow from ENS policies and the focus on equity.
Yeah.
And, I mean, if you link the two up, we've got policies and we're deliberate about them, but you're also making changes in how you operate the schools based on them.
I'm just gonna make a note there so we can figure out where that would go. And we may already have that in other standards as well, and it can be incorporated in multiple spots, but thank you. On 1.5, the first part here is that all members operate under written code of ethics and ethical standards within the institution, so that's already built into our board policy. We have the code of ethics. All governing authority members participate in ongoing PL beyond the requirements required. And so an example of that would be that competency-based education symposium we went to in Colorado. I think is a great example. And then, of course, we often take GSBA courses or go to workshops and things, and those are often beyond what's required of the state. One idea we had of something we could do better is get you guys involved in some of the PL at schools or observing classes and things like that. Could be a goal for us of kind of getting you to see what's going on with the staff. So that was one idea we had.
Is there any reason to mention any of the work, like all the professional training that, is this at a board level or at a?
Board level.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
it's for you guys in particular.
the courageous conversations that we did.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Yeah, great.
Well, and all that policy governance stuff, we didn't give any credit.
You're right.
Oh, right.
See, some of these happened so long ago, it's hard to remember. That's perfect.
And what about the, what do we call them, the retreats that we do? That, where would that be included?
So, see, because most of the retreats we do are how we get our required training, I didn't list them here.
Okay.
Because this is about going beyond,
I gotcha.
so. All right, the policies clearly identify and action support the legal and organizational roles and responsibilities of the governing authority, so we have that in our policy already. So that's just two examples, there's probably some more. And then this is basically the policy governance idea. Like, do we know the difference between board governance and day-to-day operations? And that's really, it's very well assumed in 4.1D, which is basically the superintendent operates the district. So that's there. The process is to collect and use evidence to evaluate the governance authority's adherence to the code of ethics. So we talked about this at one point, that yes, we have it, but we don't talk about it on a regular basis. I think it might have even come up, some of our norms and stuff came up in one of our recent conversations. So we thought that we could just make as a growth area, and the growth could be, let's set an annual self-assessment where we talk about the code of ethics and say, hey, how are we doing? Are we following what we put in our policy? Are there things we can do better, whatever? What do you think of that?
I agree, but I guess my hesitation is that I think that historically we have had an annual self-assessment. and I feel like
This is specific to code of ethics, though.
well, but that's,
Is that
I mean-
part of that? I can't even remember.
well, the code of ethics, I mean, okay, did I take any bribes this year? No. You know what I mean? The code of ethics is as written, is just kind of, not, I mean, that, compliance with that is just kind of a given.
Yeah,
But the roles and responsibilities would be the focus, I would think.
oh, yeah,
And
okay.
so I think the self-assessment that we've historically done at our retreat, as part of our retreat, is really very much focused on that. And what happened is that one of our retreats was in Colorado, and so we didn't have that normal,
Yep,
we skipped one.
That's right.
We shouldn't have, but I feel like we only really skipped one, and then, COVID got in the way this year, but even then, we had our roles, we had
Yep.
our board norms, and sustainability.
yep,
I think we do it.
okay, cool.
And we should put in the policy to make clear that it's an expectation that we do it every single year.
Yeah,
You know, and,
so
well,
maybe that could be the growth is, to make the code of ethics part, because we do already have the roles and responsibilities part, make the code of ethics part also clear in that process. Is that what you're
We
saying?
could amend to the extent it's not in there, I can't tell you if it is or not, but we could look at the policy and say, it's expected that we're gonna do X, Y, and Z every single year. And I'm pretty sure that the board self-assessment is part of that, but I'm not positive.
and maybe mention, reviewing our norms each year.
Yes,
And we did do it, I mean, I think that could go in the, you know, in the column where we did do it this year, but
Yeah.
that, we haven't been doing it every year. So I think this year we did it, but we hadn't done it for many, many years, several years.
yep,
Another thing that we should do, that I think might fit into this, but I'm not sure, but is to be thinking about the orientation and sort of onboarding of new members, so that we're not figuring that out when we get them.
yeah,
And we had talked about that, Garrett used to talk about it a lot, we just never really followed through.
I'm just looking real quick to see if there's where the best spot for that would be. It fits a little bit with this one.
Are you referring to the orientation that James and I had with Bob Wilson and his staff?
Yeah, just the overall process of making sure we have really good onboarding for board members.
Right.
I'm gonna put it here, and if there's a better spot, we can move it, but,
Which would include having we were gonna do this before everything went virtual, but including having the board norms conversations kind of month one instead of month 10.
right, yep.
That kind of thing.
Cool. There we go. The longitudinal data, again, that was one we just marked as a growth area. A lot of it is because we just haven't been able to be consistent, because we are early in the process, but, and then decisions made by governing authority consistently reflect actions aligned to the code of ethics and legal and organizational roles and responsibilities. So what they're trying to get to here is what GSBA is always preaching. Do you know the difference between board roles and superintendent roles is basically what they're trying to get at. So we thought a good question for that would be, where's an example where the board stayed in the governance role, even though it would have been easy to jump into the implementation role?
Just gonna
And we
say
think COVID
COVID.
might be the perfect example of
I was
that.
gonna say it before I even
But
saw it.
again, that budget you created for how to allocate the teacher
Yeah.
resources, like, we gave you the bucket of money and you worked out how to do it.
Yeah, perfect. So that's it. So, if you have other thoughts, let me know, but, that's the gist of it when we get closer to the time of the actual accreditation. What we'll do is we'll start gathering this evidence, where there's actual evidence, and then we may have some more discussions before we actually do the interviews and stuff, but,
One more bullet point on that last one.
Yeah.
A lot of the equity work is a really good example of that.
perfect. All right, anything else that you guys can think of right now? And we can still tweak this, it's just keeping this ball moving, so,
Yeah, thank you.
awesome. All right. That is it, that's all we have for tonight.
Okay. On time.
On time, look at that, what we.
Yeah, 2 minutes to spare.
Executive session.
Yeah, we'll do that after.
Okay.
All right, so
Thank
this,
you.
ends our board work session on January 27th at 6:58 PM.
And Jana, there's another link in your